Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about anti-maskers. Anti-maskers have been one of the broader issues of the pandemic, and while statistically speaking they're a small issue, I think that they're fascinating. Terrible people, but fascinating. The thing that to me is so interesting about anti-maskers specifically is that I can kind of understand people who are against lockdowns or don't trust vaccines. They're wrong, but I can understand them. Masks are different. You can see every part of them. You can even make them at home. There's obviously no risk in using them. And while I cannot wait to stop wearing them, they're really minor inconvenience. So why, out of every injustice that's happening right now, latch on to this issue? There's just a few pieces of fabric and a couple strings. At what point in that process does Bill Gates smuggle a tracking chip or an adrenochrome harvester in? This is also a bit of a personal issue for me, since for a while these clowns were having massive marches through Toronto and my apartment was on their route, so I'd have to deal with them bothering regular, conscientious citizens like myself who are just trying to mind our own business by sleeping until 3 in the afternoon. This is also possibly not a particularly relevant issue since most of my audience is American and we're on our way out of this pandemic, at least in the global north. But they're still up here in Canada where I've got 3 more months to go before I so much as get my second shot, let alone we start reopening. Enjoy your summer, fuckers. Also, throughout this video, I'm going to try to avoid being mean to anti-maskers as much as I can. While I do have the utmost contempt for these people, I'm going to try not to poison the well too much by making them look stupid. They do a good enough job of that on their own. You are under arrest for assault. 2 counts. Alright, I'm Dave Rubin and we're doing something a little different today. I'm live in studio with my guest who is just outside. I have not seen him yet, but I have been told that he is wearing a tiny mask. Michael Malice, welcome to the Rubin Report. It's good to see you again. Yes, you are face. There's already one assault charge coming. Yeah, I got this too. In this case, you get out of here. Don't wear your mask. He's in my custody. I have a feeling we're going to do the entire interview this way. Of course. We can't joke around. No, this is serious. Yeah. I want to show your grandma. No, thank you. They're both dead. So now, let's dive in and figure out why these people are like this, and what that might mean. As always, let's start by looking at the history. I swear to God, I didn't planned to make my videos this way, but I've realized now that this is a part of basically every video. Something that's pretty interesting about anti-maskers is that while past pandemics have been the source of conspiracy theories dating back as far as you can go, anti-maskers are kind of a new thing. A lot of articles I've read have said that there were anti-maskers rampant during other pandemics, but that doesn't seem to be the case. While there were people doing stupid shit like poking holes in their masks so they could smoke while wearing them, which, like, imagine how gross it would be to wear that mask, but also it doesn't seem like that was as much a matter of organized opposition to mask wearing as much as it was due to the fact that people really didn't know much about masks, and the standards for what qualified as one were incredibly loose. Like, the government was telling people to make masks at home out of cheesecloth, so I don't really think people fucking that up counts as anti-masker shit. An organized anti-mask movement has only ever happened once before, just over 100 years ago in San Francisco during the Spanish flu. While San Francisco wasn't as decimated by the Spanish flu as other parts of America, it was still brutal, and while things could have been worse, they could have been a lot better. One big advantage that San Francisco had was that it was one of the last cities in America hit by the pandemic, so they had the advantage of knowing what they were in for. A piece of advice that they received from Philadelphia read, "Unzip your woodworkers and cabinet makers and set them to making coffins. Then take your street laborers and set them to digging graves. If you do this, you'll not have your dead accumulating faster than you can dispose of them." So that's grim as fuck. Really puts the wash your hands for 30 seconds advice we got early on in the pandemic into perspective. Having received this handy tip, the city did what you would probably expect and completely ignored it. The key thing to remember here is that the Spanish flu hit during World War I, and so in the early days of the pandemic, there were all sorts of parades to encourage liberty loans going on, which not great. That said, this likely wasn't the cause of the early spread. While the parades obviously didn't help, the real issue was the workers crammed into crowded shops and factories. It took a while before the city began enacting lockdowns. As cases climbed, people got scared and avoided going out as much as they could. Indoor spaces were eventually closed down as hospitals became overwhelmed, and they brought in every doctor or nurse they could find, along with teachers, priests, and nuns who all volunteered to help as well. While San Francisco never wound up with overflowing morgues, basically all of the city's most basic services like telephones and garbage disposal were brought to their knees. But then in October of 1918, the chief of San Francisco's Board of Health, Dr. William Hassler, almost single-handedly ended the first wave of the pandemic with his radical idea of getting people to wear masks. Also, while some parts of the story read almost exactly like what we went through in 2020, some parts are ridiculously quaint by current standards. For one thing, a guy named Hassler hassling people to wear masks. Dude's career would not have survived today. The memes alone would have ended him. Hey, Hassler! More like, actually, no, just Hassler works. Now, while masks seem pretty basic now, I wasn't exaggerating when I said that it was a radical idea to get ordinary people to follow the same protocols that doctors did. Originally, it was seen as too difficult to enforce and was only recommended for doctors and those sick with the flu, then some store clerks, but eventually everyone. Masks were pushed really hard, even more so than the vaccine that was coming out. One newspaper wrote, "It will still be impolite to acknowledge an introduction without a mask, and the man who wears none will be likely to become isolated, suspected, and regarded as a slacker. Like a man of means without a Liberty Loan button, he'll be shy of friends." And it worked really well. Hasker explained very effectively that the virus had an incubation period of like 2 to 3 days and told people to wear masks, and that while they wouldn't see an effect right away, to give it a few days and they should see a reduction in cases after that. And as expected, about 5 days after the mask mandate went into effect, there was a massive reduction in cases. Now, Hasker was described as a massive keener. He insisted that masks be worn until a week after the last flu case. But as we'll see, that was wildly optimistic. Basically, people got real sick of masks real quick. This was for all the obvious reasons. Masks do, after all, suck to have to wear, but also, very tellingly, as Alfred W. Crosby wrote in his book, America's Forgotten Pandemic,
others of a more thoughtful cast count masks a humiliating and unconstitutional interference with personal liberty. Above all, masks were just too absurd and depressing.
I'll come back to this soon, but it's incredibly telling that Crosby describes the type of people who were and still are anti-maskers as a more thoughtful caste. The kinds of people who tend to find masks humiliating are the ones who have to go into stores wearing them, not the people working in those stores. This is honestly amazing to me. If anyone has the right to be pissed about masks, it's the people who have to wear them for an entire 8-hour shift, not the people who think it's lame that they need to wear them for the 5 minutes they spend in line at a cafe. But overall, the first mask mandate was very much observed, largely because it was tied into the war effort. Wearing masks wasn't just about protecting yourself or others, but rather a patriotic duty to help your country. There's a Red Cross PSA that said, "The man or woman or child who will not wear a mask now is a dangerous rider." I think that this shows that wearing masks is a very abstract action, that in order to make sense of it, people need to attach other broader goals to it in order to justify it. I think universally it's a lot easier to be cool with wearing a mask for a set period of time to accomplish what seems like a real material goal. This also, to tie this into the present day, has to do with the types of groups masks are associated with, which in modern day Western countries are Asian people, Muslims, and Antifa. This is also related to how feminist scholars like Margaret Children and Elizabeth Ross have written about the ways that certain bodies are viewed as more permeable than others. Specifically women's bodies, as well as those of Asian people who have traditionally been thought of as more feminine by Western colonists. But so, back to San Francisco. Once the war ended, people very quickly stopped following the mask laws. Part of this came from people pointing out that aspects of the laws made no sense. Why they need to wear a mask in a park, but could go to a restaurant and take their mask off to eat. Also, city officials were being caught not following the rules. Hasker, along with the mayor and other high-ranking officials, were caught on camera at a boxing match not wearing masks. As Crosby writes,
the worst possible fates finally overtook the mask ordinance. It became funny.
People would wear masks around their chins indoors, and when someone saw a cop coming, they'd yell, "Submarine!" which was an old-timey slang term for cops, and then everyone would put their masks back on and scatter. Honestly, I think that we could bring that back. ASAP, baby. The city started conducting raids, fining, or jailing people for not wearing masks. There was also allegedly an instance of a cop shooting someone for not wearing a mask, although I say allegedly because the only source for this I could find was Crosby, and unlike every other claim he makes, he doesn't provide any sources, which, like, you would think there would have at least been a newspaper article about something like that, but nope, I couldn't find anything. What the hell do you know, Alfred W. Crosby? What are you hiding? Soon, the mask ordinance in San Francisco was lifted. This was largely due to the fact that it wasn't really possible for it to be enforced, but also, to be fair, cases were by that point very low, and so this was what the city decided to highlight as their reason for lifting it. Everyone was told they could stop wearing masks because they'd been such upstanding citizens and done so much, which, to be fair, was at that point largely true. But wouldn't you know it, the virus came back. Slowly at first, and mostly affecting immigrants and the poor, so no one paid it much mind. A lot of people just dismissed the new cases as the common cold. Also, there was one really weird article that blamed the rising cases on
Oi? Oi, tudo bem? Nice. Sim, estava só a dizer nice. Vou saber. Sim, eu já passei o recibo, eu já pedi o recibo. Certo isso, certo? Sim. Certo, temos que ver isso. Sim, opa, é assim, claro, sim, mas uma impressão. Eu tenho que ver o tamanho que aquilo dentro. Este queres, por exemplo, o tamanho A2, estamos a falar de 60 cm por 42. É também claro, eu imprimo isto por. A impressão disto é tipo 10 euros. Você fazer isso, mas posso tentar eu ver uma moldura. Agora tenho que pegar nela. Mas queres-me que posso. Sim, diz. Ok. Sim. Não, é sim, mas eu não preciso tanto. Está para alguma coisa. Ok, eu posso ver como é que ela dá, mas também não sei se queres duas impressões a um, bem, porque isto estamos a falar de cartazes quase tipo cartazes de cinema. Tens espaço? Tens preto, é isso? Pronto. Se quiser, é assim. Eu acho que A2 é um tamanho porreiro. Se tu tiveres, eu posso agora pegar numa fita para ver. A2 é um tamanho não muito porreiro. Ou melhor, se tu tiveres dois livros A4, é juntar 4 livros A4 e vejo o tamanho, não é? Isso é um tamanho porreiro e esse tamanho eu tenho certeza que a impressão fica bem. Provavelmente a impressão fica bem também maior. Ok, está bem. Então eu vou fazer o seguinte. Há algumas molduras pretas claras do IKEA que tem que dar para A2 como para um bocadinho maior. Eu vejo também isso e vejo o que é que ele dá. Eu agora estou aqui a pintar, mas sei que o cara já pega isso. Está bem, está bem. Sim, e depois quando nos encontramos, preferes que eu tenha moldura coisa e tal, né? Portanto, depois nessa altura eu passo das molduras, tu passas o livro. Sim, também não há urgência. Não é pouco. Está tudo bem com vocês? Sim. Sim, há muitos géneros. Mas nada sério, não é? Aquelas coisas normais. Por acaso, eu conheço poucas pessoas que tenham mesmo apanhado o Covid, pessoalmente eu. Mas os que apanharam foi o filho de um que passou ao patrão, que passou à equipa toda. Acabar também não estavam muito chorados. Como podes imaginar. Está fixe, ainda bem, está tudo bem. Então eu ainda hoje pego uma imagem e vejo isso. 10 coisas daqui a 10 tamanhos. Tá? Vá, abraço, claro.
Women not wearing shoes?
Our women who appear in the streets barefoot, or nearly so, with their abbreviated slippers and big stockings, are simply inflating an attack of flu.
But soon they realized it wasn't just barefoot women. The flu was coming back. Last time, masks helped so much, so Hassler said to put them back on, and the mayor agreed and brought back the ordinance, but it didn't work. People weren't scared anymore, and they were tired of this shit. Was it worth it? Do masks even work? There was an op-ed about a guy who was vaccinated, wore a mask, and still caught it. The title was, "What's the Use?" 90% of people didn't follow the new rules. And this is where we get our first organized anti-maskers. While no one except Hassler really supported the mask ordinance, the main charge against them was led by San Francisco's Christian Scientists. Unlike regular scientists, Christian Scientists are a sect of Christianity that forbids the use of basically all forms of medicine and instead relies on the healing power of prayer. An op-ed written by a representative of the San Francisco Church of Christian Science read,
Christian Scientists submitted to the closing of their churches and the wearing of masks as gracefully as they could while the epidemic seemed serious, expecting that these restrictions would be of short duration. To enforce the old mask ordinance or to enact a new one would ruin business, discredit the city in the eyes of the country, and interfere to an unwarranted extent with personal liberty. If anyone believes a mask will protect him from influenza, let him by all means wear one. Nobody objects to his doing so. But why should he, secure behind his mask, try to force masks on others? If they, without masks, take the influenza, they cannot communicate it to him.
That was written 100 years ago. We've come so far. If that was written today, they'd probably also mention QAnon. The Christian Scientists weren't alone, however. They were unsurprisingly joined by the city's libertarians. Together, the two groups created the Anti-Mask League. This part's honestly hilarious, though. The Anti-Mask League died out faster than a Christian Scientist during a pandemic. They had exactly one meeting where they broke into two factions who spent the entire meeting shouting at each other. One faction was made up of the moderate members who simply wanted the new mask order repealed. The other was made of more radical members who wanted Hassler removed from office. I just love how quaint this feels. Like, if it happened today, the radical side would be insisting that Hassler was part of the deep state cabal and demanding he was hanged for treason. Anyway, they shouted at each other for like 4 hours until the absolute king who rented the venue that they met at stood up, called them all idiots, and then turned off the lights. Now, while the Anti-Mask League was a small and hilarious minority, no one liked or obeyed the mask laws. Newspapers were publishing articles about how masks weren't worth it, even though without them many more people would die. But come on, what's more depressing? Burying your loved ones or seeing people wearing masks during the holidays? If this wasn't obvious, the answer they came to was that people wearing masks were more depressing. And then on December 18th, 1918, a guy tried to send a bomb to Hassler. It wound up being delivered to the wrong address and also not going off. And this was also over 100 years ago, so I think it's fine for me to make fun of this. The bomb was just a box full of gunpowder with a match attached to an alarm clock. Like, full-on Wile E. Coyote shit. After that failed, I'm surprised they didn't try to drop an anvil on him or paint a road onto the side of a brick wall. One thing that's interesting, though, was that most of the opponents of the mask mandate, at least those with much political power, were business owners who were worried masks would hurt holiday shopping. But at this point, the restaurant workers union joined them in fighting to get rid of masks. Hassler, classic lib, was shocked people weren't paying attention to the science and tried to convince them, which didn't go well. Ultimately, the mask mandate was rescinded, and Hassler said the dollar sign is exalted above the health sign. And so, as you might expect, things got much worse. At the end of December, they had their worst days yet. Then, after New Year's, they reopened schools, and I was shocked by this, actually enforced masks in schools, and then politicians started being like, yeah, maybe we should just go back to full masks after all. And this time, Hassler was even able to bring organized labor back over to his side. There was a city council meeting where the council was fully on board with masks, but citizens were not. For hours, citizens voiced their complaints about how masks weren't necessary and how you could cure the Spanish flu with healthy thoughts or some weird Russian superfood. The best part is one guy said that if it became a crime to not wear a mask, then they should arrest him then and there. And so, I cannot explain this at all, but it's amazing. The city council asked him to join them at the front of the room. I desperately want to know what happened here or what they thought they were doing. Did they just like his moxie? Was this some ill-conceived attempt at reverse psychology? Is asking to be arrested actually how you get on the San Francisco City Council? Just every high-ranking public official got their office by committing a felony. If murdering a man in cold blood is a felony, then arrest me now. My God, this young man's got gumption. Let's hear him out. Anyway, the mask mandate passed, but didn't really matter since at this point, literally no one took it seriously. Like, even with last time, when no one followed the rules, at least they basically had masks that they pretend to wear. This time, people were like throwing on a loose silk scarf and calling that a mask. The story's kind of anticlimactic, though. Ultimately, it turned out not to matter much since the warm weather and the vaccine ultimately caused cases to drop without the help of masks. Now, at this point, I'm going to go into who opposed masks in 2020. But before I do, while this group does overlap massively with anti-vaxxers, I'm not really going to talk about them at all. For one thing, the clown prince of left tube, H. Bomber guy, covered them in a new video in much more detail than I could go into here. He makes like one video a year, and it had to be about this right now. Do you hear something? But also, as I said earlier, while anti-vaxxers are, and I can't stress this enough, very, very wrong, please get vaccinated, I can at least understand them. I mean, fear of needles is a common phobia for a reason. But also, there is a history of medical experimentation on racial minorities that makes it kind of makes sense for instance, black people to be hesitant about vaccines. Or, for example, indigenous people were more than a little skeptical when Canada prioritized them as one of the first groups here to get the jab. I mean, if there's one group the government of Canada has throughout its entire history up to and including present day demonstrated it does not give a fuck about the well-being of, it's them. But on the other hand, if vaccines weren't safe or did something sinister, the Israeli government wouldn't have prevented Palestinians from getting it. If the vaccines had mind-controlling microchips or something sinister in them, Palestine would have been fully vaccinated in under a week. I'm also not very interested in going into the reasons why these people claim they oppose masks very much. For one thing, because they're wrong. It's not harmful to wear masks, and they are pretty effective at preventing the transmission of COVID. But also, I don't think these things are very important to anti-maskers either. Well, there are for sure lots of them who do genuinely believe this stuff because they've been fed a steady diet of misinformation. When you listen to a lot of their rhetoric, they tend to focus much more on how masks make them feel and what they consider them to be a symbol of. The bullshit medical pseudoscience then seems much more like a post hoc supplementary justification for what they already believe. You can especially see this with how some anti-maskers are now saying that they're going to wear masks, socially distance, and stay home once things reopen to avoid people who've been vaccinated. Finally, I'm going to be committing the cardinal sin of Canadian video essayists by talking about the place where I live instead of America for once. Ooh, do you hear that? That's my analytics plummeting. I think I lose a subscriber every time I say A. This is because I'm most familiar with my local brand of anti-maskers, as well as because since our conservative premier unsuccessfully tried to institute martial law,
we're taking decisive action on the ground to dramatically step up enforcement. We've made the difficult but necessary decision to give police and bylaw officers special authorities to enforce public health measures.
We have made the deliberate decision to temporarily enhance police officers' authority for the duration of the stay-at-home order. Moving forward, police will have the authority to require any individual who is not in a place of residence to, first, provide their purpose for not being at home, and provide their home address. Police will also have the authority to stop a vehicle to inquire about an individual's reason for leaving their residence.
Ontario has become a bit of a mecca for people who now think that Doug Ford is a communist.
Doug Ford is an elected Ontario premier, and he looks like Sylvester when he just got caught eating Tweeter. I mean, he looks like the most guilty, lying, just disingenuous sack of garbage. I mean, look at it. Like a giant demonic ferret. The corruption, by the way, I know this for 100% fact, absolutely confirmed over 8 years of research. The entire Great Reset nonsense is centered in Toronto. And that's why Ontario's getting lit up right now, which, given how he's used the pandemic to streamline evictions, completely decimating tenant rights, something which I have not seen any anti-maskers talk about, I find the idea of him being a comrade pretty unlikely. And that's one of the big things you first notice about anti-maskers. They are extremely conservative. This is incredibly obvious to anyone who's followed this at all, but it's worth mentioning because it's something that they completely deny. But I don't know, if I was in a bipartisan group of diverse citizens concerned with government overreach, I'd find it odd if people were holding anti-abortion signs or Trump and QAnon flags at my protests in Canada. Or, I don't know, I'd be concerned if neo-Nazis were showing up to support business owners who stay open to protest masks and lockdowns while being totally not conservative. That's just me, though. One very useful quantitative study done throughout the pandemic found that the strongest predictor of someone being anti-mask is them being a Christian nationalist. Christian nationalism is a cultural framework that wants to elevate an ethnic identitarian vision of Christianity and make it synonymous with American culture. And when we say Christian here, that is definitely something of a dog whistle, since it basically just means white.
Christian nationalism doesn't involve a singular sect of Christianity, and many in the movement don't even regularly attend church. The point isn't really about religion, but about establishing a nebulous us and them. So while this is obviously extremely similar to white nationalism, the difference here is that they center a loose concept of Christianity as the key marker of group membership, although that is a very flexible term that often stands in for things like race, language, ethnicity, and citizenship. So while we might kind of just be getting into semantics here, the basic difference is that Christian nationalists are the type of people who will say they don't see color, whereas white nationalists will say that they very much do. There's not so much a difference in ideology as there is one in intensity. The big thing here, though, is that Christian nationalism is about combining Christianity with populist libertarianism. This stems from post-World War II during conversations around communism. Capitalism, specifically free market neoliberal libertarianism, if you'll excuse the triple redundancy, became led into Christianity as a propaganda tool during the Cold War. Christian nationalism is all about viewing society in a hierarchical way, connected to traditionalism and ostensibly tied to Christianity. They generally oppose science since it represents an opposing epistemology, especially in any case where it challenges religion on moral issues. This extends into kind of unintuitive places. Christian nationalists oppose basically all collective action, so things like government intervention in the economy are opposed, and instead they believe that something like the national economy will be fine as long as the moral fabric of the country is doing fine. Now, while I do not want to cut these fascists any slack, a big part of why the anti-mask movement exists has to do with the government doing a terrible job handling COVID-19. Just like 100 years ago in San Francisco, when obviously irrational mask laws were put into effect, people figured that if that batshit conclusion to come to, but hey, Christian nationalism's a hell of a drug, or healing crystal, whatever. Now, this basically also become much worse than 100 years ago, in no small part because of neoliberalism. As I mentioned in my Doomsday Prepper video, in his book, The Culture of Control, sociologist David Garland argues that the reason crime prevention takes on such a prominent role in politics is because while politicians need to be seen as doing something, the fact that most political power has been handed over to corporations means that those politicians can't do anything that risks stepping on the toes of capital. And so, tough on crime policies emerge as a convenient place to be seen to wield political power without ever doing anything that will hurt the big corporations who really call the shots. And we saw this play out in Ontario, where in the face of record high COVID numbers, which every expert agreed were coming from non-essential workplaces, our Premier, Doug Ford, banned all outdoor activities, issued a stay-at-home order, and gave police the authority to stop anyone outside their homes, aka Karl Marx's wet dream. Now, let's take a step back here and look at masks more broadly. Deborah Lupton, Claire Southerton, Marianne Clark, and Ash Watson present a socio-material analysis of the face mask in COVID times in their creatively named book, The Face Mask in COVID Times, a Socio-Material Analysis. Socio-materialism is a field of analysis that views people as an assemblage of parts, in the same way that our bodies are a collection of cells coming together to make a whole. Socio-materialists argue that our personhood is not just our bodies, but an assemblage of the things we interact with and which allow us to exert or limit our agency. This all draws from something called more than human theory, which is based on certain indigenous philosophies dealing with the ways that who we are is constructed in dialogue with the various non-human things in our lives. one of the really interesting things with masks has been how they've been domesticated through incorporating them into our lives, as well as how values and meaning have been imposed onto them through custom masks with artwork or political slogans on them. What the authors of the Face Mask in COVID Times argue is that part of the motivation behind the anti-mask movement has been a resistance to the domestication and integration of masks into people's personhoods. But also, the virus itself has, from this perspective, become an interesting part of our personhoods as well, through how it's limited our agency and changed the ways we interact with the world, each other, and ourselves. But unlike masks, the virus has instead been a sort of non-entity and a non-event. As the French writer Michel Houellebecq wrote,
"We find ourselves in the midst of an epidemic that proves to be just as boring as it is worrisome. A banal virus, really not so different from any flu virus, but with unknown survival conditions, vague symptoms, sometimes benign and sometimes deadly, and not even sexually transmissible. In short, a virus without qualities. And while this epidemic can easily cause several thousand deaths in the world each day, it meanwhile produces the curious impression of being a non-event."
Now, Houellebecq got a lot of shit for that line, which is kind of fair, to be honest. Like, people are dying and he's bored because the virus isn't sexually transmissible. Fuck you! But I also definitely get what he means. I've often thought how weird it is how these uncertain times will literally be in history books, and yet I never bored. I think that one of the defining aspects of the pandemic has been this sense of suspended animation, this feeling that the past year and a half hasn't been real life, but a transitory state. One example of this is how my friend Jill Goblin has done some work as an extra in TV shows of the pandemic, and on set was told not to wear a mask while filming because it needed to be realistic. So it's interesting how only now that we're coming out of the pandemic do we start to see media addressing it, but only in the past tense. One of the pretty cool things about living in Ontario is that there's no organization to our vaccine rollout, so instead of some centralized portal, everyone I know, including myself, who's gotten the vaccine, has found out about it through a Twitter account called Vaccine Hunters Canada, or seen their friends' Instagram stories, and that's how we find out where to go. I was talking to someone about this after we both got our first vaccines, and they said how after all that we've been through, it felt really good to have some degree of control over a situation. I think one of the key motivators for anti-maskers has been the same thing. Refusing to wear a mask, while an incredibly selfish and stupid thing to do, is a very efficient way to exercise control during a year when all of our behaviors have been more thoroughly managed than I have ever experienced before. And finally, this brings us to the philosophies of Michel Foucault. Without going too into it, this is, after all, a channel for people who don't read theory by someone who doesn't read theory. Foucault was interested in the ways that different types of power control people. From feudal lords who'd exercise their sovereign power by maiming or executing individuals who disobeyed them, to more sophisticated ways that modern governments control whole populations through systems like education, prison, and even public health. In opposition to the philosophies of Descartes, which centered the individual, Foucault's central insight was that power creates certain types of people. Foucault's philosophy is basically just the new guy just dropped me in. And while I doubt that anti-maskers are particularly big fans of postmodern philosophy, this is an insight that I think anti-maskers are acutely aware of. Looking into the ways Foucault's theories can be applied to the pandemic, it's shocking to see how well they map onto anti-masker talking points. The use of contact tracing apps to enforce control through the collection of personal data, the use of disciplinary and sovereign power to enforce lockdowns and punish those who fail to comply, the ways people will internalize COVID restrictions and enforce them on others. When you strip away all the other bullshit talking points, I think the central anxiety that anti-maskers are acting on is a refusal to be shaped into this new kind of person. Now, this is not to say that there's some kind of revolutionary potential in the anti-mask movement, since what they're advocating for is an accelerated version of what I'd argue has always been essentially the status quo, in which human lives are seen as expendable in service and feeding the death machine of capitalism. The thing that they seem not to grasp is that far from a communist takeover, what minimal COVID restrictions that there are have been enforced because actually people dying is itself bad for the economy. What I think that we're seeing here is a battle between competing, to use Foucault's term, epistemes, or worldviews, which very crucially are based in completely different realities. And while anti-maskers do make up a mercifully small subculture, heads up, boomer shit incoming, everyone existing in more or less the same reality is a precondition for the existence of a functioning liberal democracy. Yeah, that's the conclusion. The real virus was fascism all along. Sorry to end on an abrupt. And depressing note, but hey, there's a good chance that democracy will do the same thing. But honestly, I think that the thing I'm supposed to do here is say something like, make sure to reach out to people who've fallen for this stuff and talk sense into them. Or worse, something about how we can turn them into leftists by convincing them that instead of the Jews, it's the capitalists controlling things. But I don't think that stuff works. Yeah, I'm not telling you to give up or consider these people a total lost cause, but if I know someone who's gone deep into this and they're now posting things like how they can prove that Doug Ford is working for Justin Trudeau, which yeah, that's how government works. But the reason this is so difficult, and also why they say stuff like that, is because these people are operating on a different reality than we are, and I don't know how to fix that. Hey everyone, sorry for doomering you at the end there. I may have recorded that on very little sleep. Thanks so much for making it to the end of the video. Big thank you to Alicia Wright for her rotoscoping work on this video. After the ordering of preferences. This episode of the Majority Report is brought to you by the Civic Engagement podcast, Future Hindsight. Join host Mila Atmos this week as she is joined by Erin Haddon, sociologist and author of Coerced, a look at forced labor in the U.S. Tune in to learn how labor under threat of punishment is still a problem in 21st century America, and how we can all work together to end it. Available wherever you get your podcasts or at futurehindsight.com. this show. The Majority Report. The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I will not let our people. The majority against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The Majority Report with Sam Cedar. It's Monday, June 7th, 2021. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the Tesley ravaged Kiwanis Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Adam Weinstein, a research fellow at the Quincy Institute, on the question of, are we really leaving Afghanistan, and how will we leave it? Meanwhile, President Manchin vows to Deep Six the For the People Act. He says no to filibuster reform. Or does he? Vaccination rates drop, imperil Biden's 70% goal. A poll indicates that masks, social distancing, worked. Joe Biden endorses the expiration of enhanced unemployment benefits in September of this year. The G7 agrees to set minimum global tax. The New York Times says Donald Trump's chief of staff harangued the DOJ to investigate the steal, the stolen election. COVID relief turns out to be buoying state budgets. Bibi Netanyahu all but gone. Hard-right Naftali Bennett claims he seeks a unity government. Joe Biden rejects the latest Republican infrastructure barely offer. Lastly, a federal judge says California assault weapon ban is unconstitutional. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. A couple of things. A federal judge in California, that assault weapon ban has been around for 30 years. That is a George W. Bush appointed federal judge. Just wanted to make that point as I say hello to Emma Vigeland. The beginning of another week. Here we are, Emma. Here we are. It's a little bit warm in many places around the country. And summer is here, and Joe Manchin decided to make it maybe the worst summer ever. We'll see.
Jeez.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit of exaggeration.
Well, Joe Manchin certainly did kind of put a wrench in things over the weekend.
Without a doubt. Joe Manchin this weekend, writing in the West Virginia Gazette, and we knew that he did not like the For the People Act. The For the People Act is S1. It is the companion piece to HR 1. It is a comprehensive election integrity bill. Well, I don't know if I would use those words, maybe. It is a bill to allow, well, I mean, it is an election integrity bill. I just don't like to use those words because that's the way the right wing has been sort of foisting this idea of election fraud. But it would keep people from being disenfranchised by Republican measures in the states. It would also provide matching funds for candidates in certain circumstances. It would provide for independent redistricting commissions. It would also require a lot of disclosures when it comes to where your money comes from. All of these things apparently
somewhat problematic to Joe Manchin. Sees that as somehow more partisan. He has said in the past, and he said recently, that he is in favor of the John Lewis voting measures, which would reinstitute some of the pre-clearance provisions and would do a lot of like the election protection stuff, if you will. However, I want to get let's let him say this in his own words. Here he is on Face the Nation this weekend.
Let me ask you about voting rights, which is another issue. You have an op-ed in the Charleston Gazette today. Again, it's an issue you want bipartisanship on. When you talk about deliberation, the Senate's slow-moving being one of its great functions, Democrats would say, while you're waiting for bipartisanship, what's happening in the states is 300 or so bills promoted by Republicans to limit voting rights, changes in the ability to overturn elections if Democrats win. They say you can't wait. Well, that's happening in the states for voting rights to pass by a bipartisan margin in the Senate.
Well, John, we have two bills before us, okay? We have the Voting Rights Act, which has passed over 5 times in our history here since 1965 in the most bipartisan way. And now we name it appropriately the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We can expand that to all 50 states. We can do so much more with that. And it's starting out to be bipartisan. I have Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska signed on in a bipartisan way. And we can work on that one, which truly does protect the voting rights.
But I guess Senator
the People Act is much greater.
Yeah, if I could just interrupt, policy gains in the state houses and achieving their goals in the states. Why would they vote for a bill someday in the Senate that's going to take away all the things they're achieving right now in those state houses?
John, they achieved what they've achieved before they went thinking they had to make changes. Why in the world would they want to make changes that basically subvert? Because I can tell you, what goes around comes around. It can be more damaging to them too. The bottom line is the fundamental purpose of our democracy is the freedom of our elections. If we can't come to agreement on that, God help us, John. And someone's got to fight for this, and we've got to say, listen, the divided country that we're in today, the insurrection that we saw January the 6th, if we don't try to heal that, if we don't make every effort and go beyond the call of duty, then what are we and who are we? We've been known to go around the world and promote democracy and observe other elections. What kind of credibility do you think we have in doing that today? So I want to fight for this, and I think the Republicans will fight for this. And understand, we must come together on a voting rights bill in a bipartisan way. You can't divide our country further by thinking you give a leeway to one or the other. And if they think they're going to win by subverting and oppressing people from voting, they're going to lose. I'll assure you they will lose.
That's not true. I love the logic there. One, the United States going around promoting democracy internationally, let's all laugh. Latin America's laughing with us, right? South America is. But, I mean, the other aspect of it, which was infuriating to me, the idea that Republican bills in these state houses are going to counteract the gains that they made in the past how many years, right? No, they're looking at their victories and they're building on them. They're trying to find a way to make voting even more undemocratic, so because they learned their lesson. Wow, when we actually limit Black people, poor people from voting in these states, we win. So let's make sure we compound that. And so it's completely faulty logic that he's using. I mean, he's not operating in good faith. He's working backwards.
I don't even understand. I don't even. You can look at the look on Dickerson's face. What he's saying is like, what you're saying is completely incomprehensible. There is no.
He's working backwards from his conclusion, which is bipartisanship.
Well, he's saying that if they pass this, it's going to come around and be a problem for them. And Dickerson asked him, like, well, look, you have them passing it in the states. Why would they then pass a bill on a federal level that will undo the things they're doing in the states? And Manchin has no answer for this because he knows he's lying. Put up that tweet from David Sirota that has two headlines from West Virginia. The West Virginia Gazette. Really, I get, what, 4 or 5 months apart? I don't know. Put that up, Brendan. Here it is, West Virginia. This is West Virginia, not even 4 or 5 months apart. West Virginia Senate passed a bill to rein in voting options just, 2 months ago, March 24th. And here's the next one. Joe Manchin, why I'm voting against the For the People Act. And the reason is because he doesn't believe in partisan changes to the voting rules. It is, but there's this, this is absurd. And there's really two ways you can look at this. One is you can take Joe Manchin at his word, particularly when it comes to the filibuster, where he says that I will not vote to weaken or eliminate the filibuster. That's what he wrote as a quote in his op-ed in the West Virginia Gazette. Now, Joe Manchin has in the past said, I will not vote for things, and then voted for them. Joe Manchin also said we should have a $4 trillion infrastructure bill, and then it sort of walked away. He also said that we should have a talking filibuster. It doesn't seem to remember that he said that. So one version of the way you interpret this is we're going to take Joe Manchin at face value, and that's it. Bottom line, you need 10 Republicans to vote on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act bill, which I think is a pipe dream, and for anything else that doesn't involve reconciliation, you got to have those 10 Republicans. Or the other one, and this is really, you pick it, folks. Just depends on how optimistic you want to be. Joe Manchin needs to perform for West Virginia voters. And when he was on CNN a week ago saying, we're not there yet, we don't need to break the country, the Republicans will come around, he wasn't as explicit as he was in West Virginia. Hard to know whether he's sophisticated in determining who he's talking to at any given point. But we know Joe Manchin feels it's incredibly important for him to be seen as not going along with those hippies in the Democratic Party. And I'm just giving the optimistic perspective. We can't shake our heads because we're in an optimistic mode.
Are we? Because I'm certainly not.
I'm trying to, and I can tell you not. When we're in optimistic mode, you got to be optimistic.
Well,
Maybe Joe Biden
can't police my emotions.
Because Joe Biden may have thought that he was helping Joe Manchin out when he says, my friend votes with the Republicans more than he does the Democrats. That Joe Manchin, might play that on a loop for his re-election campaign.
So, I know, we just need AOC to speak out against him, and then we'll have all the ammo he needs. And just lastly, he points out the Voting Rights Act being passed in a bipartisan fashion. The reason we need to pass, the For the People Act, was to re-implement a lot of what was in the Voting Rights Act because the Supreme Court said, the southern states aren't racist anymore, don't worry about it.
Right.
So it's just we're going backwards in a Republican partisan fashion, and he just obscures that fact for his own branding exercise. It's just maddening.
Yep, it is maddening, and like I say, if folks need a thin reed of optimism to hold on for, maybe Joe Manchin needs to go through this whole little playlet before he will vote to do some change to the filibuster that doesn't weaken it, it just makes it better. And by better, it ends up weakening it, but he'll never refer to it as weakening. I mean, all I can tell you is that the strategy of politicians doing and saying horrible things as a way of giving themselves oxygen space to move is not unprecedented. Barack Obama, you know, I'm not saying it works, but Barack Obama deported more people in this country, from this country, than any president prior to him. And he did so as a way of trying to buy credibility so that he could go and do some immigration comprehensive reform. It was a fool's errand. It was a horrible and inhumane strategy, and it failed. But I'm just saying that so that you understand that politicians sometimes think that way. Joe Manchin may be thinking, like, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say it in West Virginia, and I'm going to lock in that sort of cosplay narrative I have there, because that's my brand. I don't do what the Democrats want. I'm an independent guy. I shot the cap and trade legislation with an AR-15. That's the type of guy I am. And maybe then he goes and does it. He does it in a way that it's a little bit more obscure than your average person in West Virginia, your average person anywhere in the country cannot tell you that if it's a filibuster that requires 40 votes as opposed to requiring 60 votes to break it, but you need 40 votes to hold it. They can't necessarily tell you that there's anything different there, but those of us who follow this on a regular basis know that it's a difference. And so, who knows? But if you want optimism, there it is. Enjoy it, because that's all I have for you. Emma?
Yeah. I thought that was an easy transition into our...
Well, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back. We'll be talking to Adam Weinstein. He's a research fellow at the Quincy Institute. And we will talk about Afghanistan, where we're at now, where we hope to be, and what the prospects for some semblance of peace in Afghanistan look like. We'll be right back after this.
It's Monday, Sam.
It's Monday. I know. I'm trying to do my best to make people, to provide some, at least the optimism option. That's actually
That's actually kind of a good name for a show.
Yeah, I was going to say the optimism option. Meanwhile, I'll tell you why I am in such a good mood. Because I know that my Carson Slim Space Guy Polo is on the way.
Oh.
Yep. And I also ordered, I can't remember the name of it, but I got another button down too. So, there's going to be some new shirts in the rotation, folks, because I can't wear a long sleeve forever. Not through this time of heat. As you know, shopping can be daunting. You never know if things are going to fit. Returns are a pain. You don't know where to start. If you're like me, you have absolutely no idea where to look for clothes or what kind of clothes you like. Well, Stitch Fix does all the hard work for me. Stitch Fix offers clothing that is hand-selected by expert stylists for your unique size, style, and budget. Every piece is chosen for your fit and your life, so you can look and feel your best. You try on pieces at home before you buy. You keep what you love. You return what you don't. Stitch Fix has free shipping and easy returns or exchanges. Prepaid return envelope is included. You don't have to go online and print out a label. None of that. There's no subscription required, and you pay just a $20 styling fee for each box, which gets credited towards pieces that you keep. There are no hidden fees ever. Stitch Fix has styles and clothing that'll fit any occasion. They have for women, they have for men, they have for kids. They ship all over the U.S. It's available in the UK as well. You can also just go on and you start to do I like this, I don't like this, and they create basically your profile, the type of clothes you like. Those are the ones they show you. You just go in and you can shop for a piece or two. That's what I did this time with my short sleeve shirt, shirts. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I'm probably going in there getting some shorts soon too. So there we go. No more. Well, I'm not gonna write off those, those type of shorts. The things that allow me to carry a bunch of stuff, but a couple of shorts that I'm gonna wear, look like I'm gonna have some measure of style. You get started today at StitchFix.com/majority. Get 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. That's StitchFix.com/majority for 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. StitchFix.com/majority. And folks, days like today, I was out there on the field. Saul had 2 baseball games this week. I'll give an update later, maybe as to how they went. But I can tell you, we were out there. It was incredibly hot. Had him drinking water, but also had him drinking liquid IV. I don't want him to go and get that, those, what do you call it, drinks, the hydrated drinks with all the chemicals and garbage in it and whatnot. And the beauty of the liquid IV I gave him, the tangerine flavored, which is the Hydration Multiplier Plus immune support. Maintains and strengthens your immune system and it keeps you hydrated. The Hydration Multiplier Plus immune support is a cutting-edge blend of vitamin C, zinc, well-muted and convenient single-serving packets that help strengthen your immune system. Zinc supports immune cell health, function, and well-muted is a naturally sourced beta-glucan that's proven to help strengthen your immune system. Each packet bursting with fresh, natural tangerine flavor. It tastes so good. My kid loves it. Liquid IV can provide 2 to 3 times more hydration than water alone. This blend is powered by cellular transport technology. It's designed to enhance rapid absorption of water and other nutrients. The company has donated over 4 million servings in response to COVID-19. Products are being donated to hospitals, first responders, food banks, and more. Folks, every day. I got my green matcha right here. And at the risk of a little bit of embarrassment, pina colada.
You think it's embarrassing, but no one.
I guess maybe people don't care, but I just in the past I've been making fun of about the pina colada stuff. So, but it's delicious. It's really like coconut, but with a little bit more fruity. But I drink it every day in the morning. I'm done with my coffee. I replace it with some of the matcha. I just have some extra water with it, so I'm more hydrated. But I also get the energy on the matcha one. And then, the other day, I had a little bit too much drink the night before. It was, I probably didn't notice it when I was doing the show because of my liquid IV. Get your liquid IV Hydration Multiplier Plus immune support at bulk at Costco or order online. Get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityREP at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order. You get better hydration today using promo code MajorityREP at liquidiv.com. And then lastly, folks, very hard to find natural products. You got to go all over the place. Cleaning products I'm talking about. But there is one marketplace where it's one-stop shopping for all of your natural goods. You can go to grove.co. Super easy. It's the Grove Collaborative. It's the online marketplace that delivers healthy home and beauty and personal care products directly to you. Grove Collaborative takes the guesswork out of going green. You can browse the site for thousands of home and beauty and personal care products. They're all guaranteed to be good for you, your family, your home, and the planet. I leaned on these guys heavily during the lockdowns, the pandemic. We are just about in the studio to go all Grove branded packages of soap that I then put into the Grove. They've got soap dispensing pumps. But as of now, still have some of that 7th generation, all unscented, of course. Both our dishwashing liquid and our hand soap, and Mrs. Meyer's. Use that for my laundry. Simple ones, nothing floral, but it's fantastic. You get all sorts of great natural products there. You can join over 2 million households who have trusted Grove Collaborative to make their homes happier and healthier. You got actually a fruit scrub brush too. That's pretty good. Plus, shipping is fast and free on your first order. Check it out. Making the switch to natural products has never been easier. For a limited time, when our listeners go to grove.co/majority. You will get to choose a free gift with your first order of $30 or more. But you have to use our special code. Go to grove.co/majority to get your exclusive offer. That's grove.co/majority. As always, we will put this stuff in our description in our podcast and YouTube. Okay, well, welcome to the program. Adam Weinstein is a research fellow at the Quincy Institute. Focuses on security, trade, rule of law in Afghanistan and Pakistan, veteran of the Marine Corps and the war in Afghanistan. Adam, welcome to the show. I'm here with Emma Bigler.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's just start where we're at. Joe Biden had announced, maybe it was a month ago, maybe it was a little longer, that we would be, that we were not going to make the May deadline, but that we were going to be pulling out of Afghanistan before 9/11, unconditionally so. My understanding is that timetable has been sped up by the military.
Well, I think the timetable that President Biden announced was a rough estimate to give the military enough time, but they found that they were able to do it quicker. And of course, there is an incentive to do it quicker rather than draw it out, I think.
What would that incentive be?
Well, I think the longer you draw out the withdrawal, the more risk there is to the remaining U.S. troops, risk of attack, and things like that. So I think once the decision was made, there was a motivation on the part of the Pentagon to get folks out as quickly as possible.
So what is the status now?
Well, DOD doesn't announce exact figures of how what percentage they're at. They give ranges, and the last range I heard was approximately 25%. And again, that was about a week ago, so I suspect it's a little bit more now.
And from your perspective, what makes this withdrawal, which we've seen announcements before this, what makes this different?
Well, I think what makes this different is that they're closing down major bases. You saw that they withdrew U.S. troops from Kandahar Airfield. They appear to be closing down Bagram. So these are giant military installations versus what we saw in the past was these military installations remained intact, and the number of U.S. troops was lowered, but now we see the United States handing over its major military installations to the Afghan security forces, which we haven't seen that before.
What are the Afghan security forces? To what extent can they? I mean, give us an assessment of their ability, I guess, and really what their, what is it that we obviously they defend the Afghani government, right? But I mean, what do you imagine is their how are they going to approach this? What is their purpose at this point, and how well will they be able to use those bases? Because the real question here seems to be, at what point does the Taliban take over Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Taliban have captured a few key districts around Kabul, which is the capital, but not in around provinces that are the encircle the capital. But they haven't. I don't think they have the ability to take major provincial capitals just yet. It's to be seen how the Afghan security forces, prevail or don't prevail. They've had some successes and they've had a lot of failures. There are plenty of outposts that have been overrun, but the special forces and some of the conventional forces have been able to thwart Taliban attacks. They lack the technical capacity that the United States provided. For example, there's a lot of questions about whether they'll be able to maintain their helicopters or continue flying them without the United States or without contractors. But on the other hand, I think
the real question is going to be, is there a resolve to fight, and does the leadership of the Afghan security forces, fragment or not? Because you could also make the argument that with the withdrawal of U.S. troops, there will be greater resolve to fight because, they can't rely on the United States anymore. So I think, I guess the conventional wisdom would say that the Taliban are slowly going to gain territory, and ultimately a future government of Afghanistan will be Taliban dominated. But I don't think that's what's going to happen in the short term, as in a year out from now, and I don't think that's set in stone. I just think that's the safe bet, but it's not for certain.
So give us a sense of so if 25% have been drawn down, and the original figure, at least at the time of the announcement, was about 2,500 U.S. troops. We're at, I don't know, another week, maybe we're at 1,500 troops, 1,700 troops, somewhere around there that are still in. Once those 1,700 are out of country, they have officially handed over these bases to Afghan security forces. Who remains in the country that is not, or that has been in there under the, under the auspices of this war that has been fought for 20 years?
Well, I mean, for example, Turkey, where they took on that responsibility, and of course, that airport is critical to the continued functioning of the Afghan government and even the Afghan security forces, so there will be a Turkish presence there. It remains to be seen whether U.S. contractors will stay in some capacity or not. Right now, it appears as if they're leaving, but who knows? Obviously, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, India, these regional countries will always have some influence in Afghanistan. So, I mean, there's going to be non-Afghan actors that are inside Afghanistan, but I think it's going to be significantly reduced, and we're going to see what happens in Afghanistan that doesn't have NATO troops there.
So the NATO troops, Turkey is there under the auspices of NATO, and is that it for the NATO complement of troops? Just Turkey at the airport?
As far as I'm not aware of all of the inside planning, but the major contingents of NATO troops, such as the Germans, the Italians, they're leaving. So Turkey agreed to provide security for the airport and run it, essentially, manage it. And so we'll see. I mean, perhaps it's not correct to say they're even providing security. They're essentially just managing the airport and ensuring that it remains functioning.
And again, on contractors, we are not leaving. There supposedly will be no American contractors there.
Yeah, supposedly there will be no contractors, but then again, I think that's a bit of a gray area because we saw that some of these contracts for the contractors extended beyond the withdrawal deadline. But if you listen to some of the congressional hearings and some of the administration's testimony, it appears that the U.S. contractors are leaving, but perhaps some of the money that the United States provides to the Afghan government can be used for other contractors, for example, contractors from Eastern Europe as an example. So I don't think there's going to be an end to contractors. I think there's going to be an end to American contractors, and of course, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a piece in the New York Times today about the CIA being concerned about some sort of black hole of intelligence once there's a troop withdrawal, right? So, I mean, I'm just curious, what kind of intelligence infrastructure do you think remains?
Well, it's going to be diminished. I mean, that piece was talking about how the United States is in negotiations with Pakistan to possibly use a base inside Pakistan or create a base or whatever arrangement they come to. And then, the United States is looking at Central Asian countries. But I think the intelligence gathering capacity will be diminished. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be diminished, but when you have U.S. troops on the ground or you have a commando raid and they detain folks, they pick up what's sometimes referred to as pocket, the USB drives, the notes, the phones, anything you might find that could be used to disrupt a terror network like Al-Qaeda. that human intelligence capacity is going to be diminished. It's my personal belief that keeping U.S. troops in Afghanistan for that purpose, when you do a balancing test, it makes more sense to withdraw. I don't think that the costs of staying in Afghanistan are worth whatever benefit and intelligence generating that we get. But objectively speaking, there will be a reduction in that intelligence capacity.
I want to circle back to that cost benefit analysis to get a sense of what the costs are associated with it. But how is it? I'm reading that same Times piece, and apparently CIA Chief Burns is in Pakistan. We know that Pakistan is not going to jeopardize the Taliban, at least the Taliban that they have the best relationship with. It's possible there could be some elements of the Taliban that they decided are no longer useful to them. How is it that when Biden first made this announcement, we kept hearing there was going to be a response within the horizon or something, where people could, our special ops or whatnot could get into the country and supposedly have the ability to sort of wage some form of cohort warfare. How is it that the CIA, and I'm not saying that they should, I would be quite happy if I felt like they had no ability in that country whatsoever. But how is it after 20 years they don't have a plan B other than us being there? I mean, is that credulous? I mean, that just seems unlikely to me.
Well, I think a more accurate way to put it would be they have a plan A that they want to do, and they're begrudgingly doing their plan B. I think the Pentagon and the intelligence community is, sometimes they don't plan for things they don't want to do. Other analysts have made that point, and I think it's a valid point. They're used to getting their way over the last 20 years. I think some folks in the Pentagon might be surprised at the course of action the Biden administration has taken, and certainly perhaps in the intelligence community. Do I think they don't have a plan B? No, I think they have a plan B. I just think it's not the plan B that they want, but there's deep relationships, especially between the intelligence community in Pakistan and in the United States. And even when relations between Pakistan and the United States are dysfunctional, those ties between the two respective intelligence communities have always remained. And I think there's a lot more cooperation than is probably seen on the surface. And there are a lot of non-state actors and terrorist groups that both countries prioritize. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Khorasan province, which is the South Asian version of ISIS, and TTP, which is the Pakistani Taliban, which the Pakistani state does challenge. They might see differently on the Afghan Taliban, but this has been one of perhaps the crux of why we weren't able to achieve the outcomes we wanted in Afghanistan. It's not so much that Pakistan wants the war in Afghanistan to continue. Pakistan would rather see a stable Afghanistan, and the United States would rather see a stable Afghanistan, but it's a matter of the ordering of preferences, where Pakistan would rather see an unstable Afghanistan that's not friendly with India than a stable Afghanistan that is friendly with India. And very early on in the war, when the United States was backing the Northern Alliance, that really shook the Pakistanis because the Northern Alliance had a close relationship with India. And the government that emerged after the U.S. invasion, of course, to this day has a close relationship with India. I think Pakistan inflates that threat, but perception is reality in international relations to some degree. And from the Pakistani perspective, they'd rather have an unstable Afghanistan than one that they view as aligned with India. So it's an ordering of preferences issue where Pakistan and the United States have never been on the same page about the Afghan government or the Afghan Taliban. But now that U.S. troops are leaving, the priorities change for Washington. They don't care about the Taliban or state building so much. Now they care about terrorism. And when it comes to counterterrorism, Pakistan and the United States perhaps have more interests in common than some would like to admit. And so I think the backup plan for the intelligence community in the U.S. will be to use some of these regional relationships to continue a CT war. Of course, they might have a more ridiculous backup plan, which I also saw reported, which was to basically back local militia leaders in Afghanistan to continue to have access to the country. I think that would be missing the forest for the trees and creating a very destabilizing situation for the sake of having access.
What other players? I mean, what other players have strong interest there, and how do they play out in that order of preference? I mean, so if I hear you correctly, you're saying that from the United States perspective, combined with Pakistan's perspective, the thing they can agree on is, look, if you need to have an incredibly repressive regime there to feel safe, because you can be sure that they're not going to be have a relationship with India. What we need from you is just some type of mechanism or guarantee that we're not going to have international terrorists from there. And as long as we don't have that problem, we won't interfere with your problem. And ultimately, it's just the Afghani people will suffer more. But that seems to be like what happens with Afghanistan, is that all these major players come in, and the people there are just basically chum. Is there another major player who is also involved in this calculation, or are those the United States and Pakistan the two? Does everything drop off from there in terms of influence?
Yeah, I mean, I think you paraphrased it quite well, and really bluntly, and I mean, that is the situation. I think the United States and Pakistan are the two most relevant outside players when it comes to the future of Afghanistan in the current situation. Russia matters, India matters, Iran matters, and many, again, some of this dysfunction perhaps will be reduced when U.S. troops leave. For example, Iran would rather see a stable Afghanistan that doesn't have a government with the Taliban in control. But so long as U.S. troops were going to be in Afghanistan, the Iranians were perfectly happy to give a little bit of support to the Taliban to sort of keep the Americans on their toes. So some of this dysfunction that played out was precisely because U.S. troops were in the country. It doesn't mean that when the U.S. troops withdraw that things will necessarily change for the better for Afghanistan, certainly not in the near term. I think you're right that Afghans are going to be the ones that suffer as these different countries play out proxy conflicts with one another in Afghanistan. But I think there is an opportunity here where all of these countries, China, Iran, Russia, the United States, Pakistan, have terrorism concerns. All of them none of them want a raging civil war next door if they can afford it that has spillover potential. And perhaps if the United States is willing to engage in aggressive diplomacy, it can avoid some of the worst consequences of the situation on the ground. I don't see a situation playing out where the Taliban don't end up being a very powerful force within the Afghan government. I think in a best case scenario, you get a political settlement where the Taliban have substantial power, and in another scenario, the Taliban take power through fighting, over time, gaining significant territory. There might be pockets of resistance that remain outside Taliban control, but they end up getting the majority of the country. And in an absolute worst case scenario, you just have a civil war that rages for another decade, and everything that comes with that.
Well, I read, I guess it was today maybe, or sometime in the past couple of days, that the U.S. has earmarked over $200 million to the Afghan government, which, on a day that Jeff Bezos announces he's going to, go to the moon in his own private rocket worth billions of dollars, just seems almost laughable. Like, it's almost hard to imagine that somebody said, let's write up a press release about this for $200 million after everything that we've done to that country. But I also read a roundtable that you had in January. I don't know if you actually convened it in person or how you did it, but it's pretty intensive. It's a roundtable with Afghani.
Conta aí. Eu vou deixar isto. A bateria chegou?